Hello and welcome back to Comparative 40k. Today's video, again voted on by our lovely patrons, is another question: are Necron flyers worth it? So if you want to get involved in our multiple polls that we set out each week, head over onto our Patreon channel, links at the top right of the screen, where you can have your say on which videos the channel will cover. Very simple. Okay, on to the Necron flyers. Let's begin by mentioning the two flyers from the Codex, which are the Doom Scythe and the Night Scythe. One is more of a transport option and the other one is more of a heavy support option. We've already done our Planet 40k review on the Doom Scythe, so check that one out if you haven't already. Points wise, the Night Scythe is 145 points and the Doom Scythe is 200 points. That Doom Scythe in particular is a bit of an investment. The base stats for both flyers are identical. They've got movement of 20 to 50 inches, weapon skill 6+, ballistic skill 3+, strength 6, toughness 6, wounds 12, attacks 3, leadership 10 and a 3+ save. So quite zippy across the board as you expect from a flying unit. They've got nothing in melee of course, and they're quite vulnerable with only toughness 6. Both have access to living metal, which slightly helps their survivability, and they do also have command protocols which you'll find that you'll barely ever gain access to, as you need to be within 6 inches of a character, which is quite unlikely. Then you also need to have a noble on the tabletop, which you might not even be fielding in the first place. Both have supersonic, which is quite the restriction. You can only pivot up to 90 degrees before doing your movement, and you need to bear in mind that you must move at least 20 inches as shown in the movement figure in the stat line. So this can cause you some issues, as your opponent has the opportunity to trap your flyer by using their own models to cover ground, forcing you to either land on top of their models, which is an illegal move. Therefore your model is destroyed, as stated on page 212 of the rulebook. Unless of course you fly off the board back into strategic reserves, but then you forego your shooting phase with the flyer. So you need to plan your movement very carefully, especially on those smaller boards. Both flyers can explode once destroyed, which can be useful for putting out those mortal wounds. They both also have the airborne ability, which is another restriction. It doesn't allow you to charge, although these things are weapon skill 6 anyway, so no big deal. They've finally both got hard to hit, which is simply a -1 to hit with ranged attacks. Somewhat useful, but a lot of units have reroll 1s in the game when they're using HQs and whatnot, so it's easily nullified. Sticking with the things that the flyers have in common, both are armed with a twin Tesla Destructor, which unfortunately is a really bad weapon at the moment in the game. It's heavy 10, now the heavy doesn't actually matter as you're a vehicle, and your Tesla, which usually means you're going to get all those misses back because your 6s will give you 2 additional hits. So you should be getting your 10 hits on average. But why they suck is they're strength 7, but there's no AP and there's only 1 damage. The strength 7 feels way too high to be firing at infantry, but the lack of AP and damage is not doing anywhere near enough for the higher toughness models with lots of wounds. Also in particular Space Marines with a 3+ armor save and 2 wounds apiece, they're not doing a lot of damage on them. 10 hits wounding those Marines on 3s after their armor save is about 1.5 damage on average, so you're not even killing a single Space Marine model with this thing. The Doom Scythe however does have a bit more punch with its heavy death ray. Heavy 3, strength 12, -4 AP, and the damage is D3 plus 3 a pop. You'll on average hit 2 out of 3 of those shots, and you'll likely be wounded on 3s against larger targets, doing about 6.7 damage on average with it at least. So the Night Scythe obviously doesn't carry the big gun, but it can instead carry 20 core infantry models into battle. They can also transport infantry dynastic agents too, which will cover a couple of the named characters. So we've established that both flyers have their different purposes. The Doom Scythe is a flying heavy support with its big gun. Does it do its job better than any of the other heavy support options in the Codex? Take for example a Doomsday Arc, which some would say is the best heavy support option in the Codex. It's 10 points cheaper than the flyer, and has its own big gun, which is most likely wounded on 3s as well. It's not heavy 3, but it is heavy D6, so it's a bit unpredictable at times with the amount of shots, but it has a much higher percentage in terms of damage outlay. The damage however, also being D6 instead of a D3 plus 3 is a bit underwhelming, whereas the flyer's damage on average will be doing 5 per wound. Now the Doomsday Arc has other weaponry with the 10 Gorse Flayers, which can do 20 shots in rapid fire, and against Space Marine targets you're going to kill 1.7 Marines on average, so very similar numbers to the twin Tesla Destructor in terms of damage output while in rapid fire, half as much while they're further out. They are only 24-inch range, so they might not even be able to get to shoot if they're out of range. So weapon wise they're kind of on par. I'd slightly edge it towards the flyer for the reliable damage. But where it gets dicey is the durability. The Arc has 2 wounds more than the flyer, but more importantly has quantum shielding, which is a 5+ in-1 save, and you also can't wound it on less than a 4+. Whereas the flyer has no in-1 save, all it has is a -1 to hit, but once you have hit it, you're pretty much wounding it, as it's going to go through armor fairly quickly. Comparing this flyer from a different angle, pulling out the heavy Locust Destroyers, a completely different type of unit here, but they still fulfill the same role in terms of heavy support. These guys cost 70 points a head, so grab 3 of them for 210 points, which is 10 points more expensive than the flyer, but it's close-ish. These guys can move and shoot heavy, and they also get to reroll 1s to hit. When they fire their Gauss Destructors, it's 3 shots for the unit at strength 10 minus 4 AP, and the damage is 3d3 damage a pop, doing about 9.3 damage on average from the 3 destroyers, which is more than the flyer does, but only slightly. They've then got a combined total of 12 wounds, which is exactly the same as the flyer, but they're not toughness 6, only toughness 5, and each time you lose a model in the unit, the damage output is going to be getting much weaker. But that brings me to another point, not just for the Doom Scythe but the Night Scythe too. Once they go below 7 wounds, their stats degrade. They now only hit on 4s, not 3s, and then when they go down to 3 wounds, they're then hitting on 5s. So it's much like losing a model from your Locust Heavies in the sense. One other good thing about the Locust Heavies is that they are infantry, so you've got the option of getting them into terrain for a 2+ armor save, and if it's dense terrain they're going to be a -1 to hit, quite like your flyers. In fairness though, the Doom Scythe's weapon is on par with the heavy support options in the Codex. I just question its survivability. Jumping back to the Night Scythe for a moment, the main job for this thing is the transport. So it's transporting units in, whether it's Lich Guard or Praetorians, along with characters too. They can get them right up and close to the action, which is where they need to be. Is it worth 145 points? Maybe. There's no deep strike restrictions when disembarking from transport, so you shouldn't be failing a charge the turn you come out. The use of the transport is quite list dependent. Firstly, you need to be playing with Praetorians or Lich Guard, and even then the Lich Guard can just use a Veil of Darkness relic with a character model. It might not even require a transport. There's also the option of strategic reserves if you're willing to pay the command points. Now you could use them with some short range gun lines such as your warriors armed with Gauss Reapers. Now these Reapers are only 12 inch but Assault 2, Strength 5 and -2 AP. So when they get out of the Night Scythe they can massacre a unit holding an objective, take 19 of them with an Overlord with a Resurrection Orb for durability, steal an enemy objective, and you can literally win the game that way. It's just a shame about the damage output with the Night Scythe. It's virtually non-existent and it doesn't have an in-1 save, so it's not lasting long. So we spoke about the good, a little bit about the bad, it's now time to get into the ugly. The biggest flaw with the 2 flyers is simple, the fact that they cannot hold objectives, period. At least the Doomsday Ark or Locust Heavy Destroyers can be scoring you backline objectives, also while firing down at targets. The flyers simply can't. The Night Scythe in particular is a bit of an issue. Once it's dropped its payload, he's virtually just flying around not doing much. There's no threat from it and it doesn't score you any primary objectives. In fact, in some cases they're a liability, as you're going to be giving up secondary points for destroyed vehicles because they're not that difficult to deal with. So to conclude, flyers do have a place in 40k 9th edition. They've got great manoeuvrability. The Doom Scythe in particular can pick off large targets that are hidden from view, as they can flank down the sides or even get down behind pretty quickly. The Night Scythe is really aiding infantry to get into key areas of the board. We don't have rhinos and impulsors and whatnot, and those Ghost Arks can only carry a max of 10 warriors, which is pretty useless as far as transports go. The damage output from the twin Tesla Destructor is non-existent, but the Doom Scythe has something pretty decent and probably has a better damage output than a lot of the actual heavies in the book. They are fairly limited though in what they do, especially the Night Scythe. It just becomes a floating cloud once it's done its job. The points giveaway is a minor problem. Some players will see a lightweight vehicle with no invuln and select Bring It Down as their secondaries. However, since the January FAQ downsized the amount of victory points you get for destroyed vehicles, it probably wouldn't be the biggest concern now. Not being able to score primaries and most secondaries, however, is a huge problem, especially in smaller games where you need almost every unit to actively be achieving something points wise. Overall, there's definitely a place for both of these units. Again, the Night Scythe is situational, and I'd probably try the Veil of Darkness relic or even strategic reserves. There's also things like Relentless Expansionist to get that 6-inch head start to footslog if you needed to. Terrain in 9th edition is much improved, so learning to make use of it with these types of units literally could save you 145 points. The Doom Scythe, I'd only really use it if the heavy slots were full, as I just see it as a heavy support option. Maybe it's just my playstyle, but I prefer the more resilient approach, so I'd rather have quantum shielding on a vehicle like a Doomsday Ark or a 4+ containment field and a Doomstalker than having a toughness 6 flyer with only a -1 to hit. So crunch time, are the flyers worth it in the Necron Codex? Depends on your playstyle, they can be, but not for me. Guys, let me know in the comments if you're using flyers, what goals do you have for them, what are you transporting inside your Night Scythe, and what are your main targets for the death ray. Drop a like on the way out and check out that Patreon to have your say on the videos and what we do here on the channel. And as always, thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next one.